So we mentioned that Melissa finally formed today, becoming the first storm to form in the Caribbean this season, and it could stall there for a few days. Joining us now is President and Chief Meteorologist at WeatherTiger, Ryan Truchelut. Ryan, welcome back to the show. First off, I just want to hear your first thoughts on Melissa's cone. I mean, it literally looks like a giant balloon or a clown nose. And the intensification we've seen so far, given the water temperatures, the odds of rapid intensification are certainly there, maybe not in the short term, but potentially long term.
You know, I would agree with that. I think in the short term, Melissa is not a well-organized tropical cyclone right now. The low-level circulation center is well west of the bulk of convection and the spin further up in the atmosphere. And that makes it very difficult for hurricane forecasters to have a good grip on what's going to happen 3 days or 5 days or 7 days from now. It really depends on how the storm evolves over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. We can say, is this going to be hanging around the Caribbean for another week or so, or is this going to make a faster turn to the north and east and threaten the Greater Antilles?
Well, I think Melissa, just in general, was interesting. The fact that it was a tropical wave that was able to get itself into the Caribbean, which typically this time of year is not necessarily very common. What's your take on Melissa's path so far, and how do you think that that could potentially impact its future transport and where it goes next? Because the fact that it was able to be a tropical storm within the short term theoretically may have lent a hand to it traveling north and getting caught up in the jet stream, but the fact that it's just a touch south means it may get missed by that North Pole and just linger in the Caribbean.
Right, that's very true. So I took a look at where storms develop in that final 10 days of October. Historically, it's more common to have storms develop in the western third of the Caribbean, and not unprecedented to have a storm develop in the central or the eastern Caribbean. But it does, in this situation, place Melissa kind of in a bit of a void between two different poles from two different mid-latitude weather systems that would attempt to steer it. One is a trough off the east coast of the U.S. that would try to turn it north, and another is ridging kind of over the Gulf that would keep it moving westward. Because Melissa's caught between those two things, it's going to not move very quickly over the next 3 to 5 days. And the National Hurricane Center track reflects that. And we don't have a lot of great historical comparables for a storm developing in the central Caribbean at this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think this hurricane season as a whole, we haven't necessarily had great comparable storms. It's just been kind of wonky with the way that they've turned, or interesting tracks, a lack of steering flow at times. But the models have been pretty interesting this season. I feel like there hasn't been one that's rang true for every storm. It's been sort of the GFS is good with this one, the Euro's been good, the AI's had a good run this year. Is there one that you're trusting with this particular forecast over the others? The initial north term was forecasted first by the GFS, and it seemed like that's where the models were leaning over the last couple of days. But now that we have that low-level center, it's trending a little bit more for how the Euro was forecasting this to play out a couple days back.
Right. I think in this situation, you really want to rely on the model ensembles where there's a lot of slightly different starts to a model run, and we're looking at, say, 50 different options versus just one, run of the operational GFS or Euro. In this case, I would definitely not put a lot of trust in the operational GFS. It's doing some pretty unrealistic things with Melissa vis-a-vis kind of really organizing it here in the next 12 to 24 hours that if you look at visible satellite imagery, they don't appear to be happening. So, I wouldn't put too much stock in one operational model, but I think what we should probably do is take a look at how the storm is evolving structurally over the next day or so, and then look at those ensemble members that kind of got it right. Mm-hmm. Where do they take the storm then, 3 or 5 or 7 days out? My thought is that that's leaning a bit further west than what the NHC forecast track is right now. But of course, weak storms their centers can jump around, they can reform, unusual and unexpected things can happen.
Yeah, definitely. Now, with WeatherTiger, you guys focus on weather and the impacts from a commodities perspective. Although we're not necessarily forecasting any big impacts to the United States at this time, is there any kind of backlog effect that we could see that could have impacts on the U.S.? I know coffee production and cocoa beans is a big deal for the Caribbean islands. Could this impact with the heavy rain that could be forecasted of close to 2-3 feet have this downstream effect?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're right on the money. This could be, even if Melissa does not become a major hurricane, this could be a very significant flooding event for the Greater Antilles. I'm talking about Eastern Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica. Obviously, there's a wind and a surge risk too here as well, particularly if Melissa can hang around through the weekend into early next week. But this is certainly something that's going to be disruptive for local agriculture. And, I do think that Melissa sooner or later is going to eject northeast out of the Caribbean, cross Cuba or Hispaniola, and then, potentially go through the eastern Bahamas and be a strong storm as it's crossing the western Atlantic. Yes, I do think it will stay east of the continental United States. I don't think this is a Florida or U.S. landfall risk, certainly not at this time. But it could, of course, be disruptive of shipping and other, kind of logistical interests as we go forward into perhaps late next week.
Yeah, one of the pieces of weather that got me interested in the science as a whole is how everything is impacted by weather, from tourism to what you buy at the grocery store. So it's really interesting to hear more about WeatherTiger and just hearing from you. That's President and Chief Meteorologist at WeatherTiger, Ryan Truchelut. Thanks so much for the insight.
Thank you.